Hey there, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Alchemi-Culture. I am your host, Phoenix Aurelius, and tonight we're chatting with a longtime colleague. First time that we're e-meeting, though. We are separated by many hundreds, if not thousands of miles. This is my very good colleague here, Daniel Wiseman. Daniel, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me on, Phoenix. Really excited to have a chat tonight.
Yeah, so for everybody who is watching, go ahead and introduce a little bit about yourself. I mean, obviously you're an alchemist. You have, you and I have rapped about alchemy a couple of times in the past. Maybe you could start there. What got you into alchemy in the first place?
Yeah, so my journey into alchemy and spagyrics really started with two different paths. I was jumping into herbal medicine as a career path, but had a long time fascination with the occult as well. So during my training into herbal medicine, where I was studying traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, some Western traditional and Western modern herbal medicine, and maintaining my occult interests, I came across Spagyrics by Manfred Junius, and I came across Real Alchemy by Robert Bartlett, and realized that there was a home for both of these things. Alchemy was a big interest of mine in the occult fields, and it was very speculative at first, but for me, I'm a bit of a skeptic, and I think that helps me in this path. But I was so interested in this stuff because it seemed like everybody who was important for all of history had been interested in it. So I was a spectator, and then I came into this very physical practice of herbal medicine, clinical herbal medicine, and then I realized, okay, actually, there's a practical aspect that's very tangible and worthwhile to explore in the whole alchemical field, and was just, I mean, mind blown, a little bit upset that I hadn't learned about it earlier, but it was very clear right away, like, this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah, especially with those interests. I came from very similar kind of interests. Been practicing various forms of occultism since just a young child, and then also had got very interested in herbs. Didn't even know that what the word spagyric meant, and came across a Philosophers of Nature document and printed it off my senior year in high school and just started making all these tinctures. It wasn't until years later working with other herbalists that I found out, hey, dude, what you're doing, it actually has its roots in the alchemical tradition. Is like, what? It opened up a
Yeah.
whole new world for me, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
So one thing that you mentioned that I thought was really cool that I'd like to maybe dive into just a little bit more is that you're very interdisciplinary in your herbalist approach, because you have some training with Ayurveda, it sounds like, and TCM and Western herbalism. And even though there are certain similarities in certain of those traditions, they all approach things actually quite differently and through quite different philosophies and diagnostics and other
Mm-hmm.
things. So how has that
Mm-hmm.
kind of influenced your work with herbalism, and how is that translated into Spagyria?
Yeah, that's a great question, and because it really has been a huge influence. And yeah, there's no doubt these systems aren't entirely, they're not synonymous or completely congruent. They have their similarities, like energetic approach or assessment and things. But even in the energetics, they could be widely different. One
Yep.
says hot, one says cold. Which one's true? But I think what it has really provoked in me is to be inquisitive, find the commonalities, and question everything. I think, which is
Mm-hmm.
a really important aspect of it, is why does this person think this so strongly while another person thinks the opposite so strongly? Yet, when we look at the results, which is the important thing here, they both can arrive at tangible results. So, what is that invisible cord that connects
Yeah.
to truth in these different practices, right? So that has helped so much with herbal medicine and me kind of forging my own eclectic practice of how I interweave all these different things. And then also with spagyrics as well, because of course no author agrees, really. No practitioner really agrees. So we've got something similar where there's the main topic, that there's some commonalities that tie things together, but then we have widely varying opinions, and somewhere in the middle of all that is the truth. So keeping that sharp mind, and trying to find places where people meet in the middle too, finding that point of homeostasis really between thoughts and practices, and different authors. Like I love to really push that with a, with skepticism and an inquisitive kind of angle to these things to really test things out.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think that that actually makes probably the biggest difference really in any sort of practice is approaching something skeptically but open-minded, and also being able to find your own answers, because as
Mm-hmm.
wonderful as traditions are, inevitably they're coming from a very certain perspective, and sometimes those perspectives over time end up growing so far
Mm-hmm.
culturally and individually from where they were created that a reimagining or a new version, so to speak, kind of
Mm-hmm.
is necessitated at some point or another. And
Mm-hmm.
I definitely work with traditional Chinese medicine myself. I work with Appalachian style medicine. I work with Western medicine. And of course, my big thing is actually the actual Paracelsian approach of,
Mm-hmm.
the five entia of disease, and working with everything that he kind of established as a medical tradition. But I'm finding even his as a medical tradition has things that need to be updated and advanced within the light of what we now know, and a cultural paradigm of how we see things. So I think it's really
Yeah,
important.
absolutely. I mean, that's such an important thing too, to really respect and gather this great wisdom from people who walked this path before us. And in the same hand, know that we have a job to do still, that, not to become dogmatic about things and not to hold people or authors in this light of perfection as much as they may offer gigantic grand truths. They may be, like kind of taking the machete and carving out a path for us to walk down. There's such gigantic value to that, but at the same time we're all human, and we're not done yet. It would be ridiculous to think that there wasn't more to be done, to be evolved, and things have changed, so there's always work to be done.
Well, see, I think that that's really actually important. And here's something, there's a great service that the internet has done, in my opinion. There's a great disservice, and I'm sure if you've been kicking around for a while with alchemy, then about all about the forums and about the Facebook groups and all these things. Like myself, I've seen you get your ass chewed by certain people who are very traditional in their approach, or who, through the internet, there's a way of interpreting what somebody's tone is that
Hmm.
actually isn't perfect to the way they come across in, quote unquote, real life.
Absolutely.
And it's so easy to misinterpret these things. And I think that if we had more opportunities to chat one-on-one like this with people,
Hmm.
even that we find fundamental disagreements with on certain approaches, we would actually find that common ground so much faster than if we were just writing, and
Yeah, it's so much easier to be a keyboard warrior and to lose tonality. And then of course, if you're somewhat stepping on toes, not necessarily intentionally in a bad way, but shaking a foundation that somebody may hold to be the be all end all, like you have to expect that. But I think that it's important for us to challenge those things. So I try to go in to these situations not to put anybody down or even to say anybody's wrong, but to ask some questions, to share what I've found that may differ from their perspectives. I expect a lot of the time to get some backlash, and I think that is good. I don't take it personally, and generally when that happens, I make an extra effort to befriend these people, speak with them privately, let them vent. Not
yeah.
take it personally, and see if there's some real value to yeah, having this contrast between one another. And I love that. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I don't lose any sleep over it either way, and just keep on trucking, try not to make it personal. It's not about me, it's not about them, it's about the truth.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to go towards. So I'm going to do what I can do to push that.
Brilliant take, brother. I think that that's the best way to get unentangled from the messes that
Yeah.
oftentimes tend to coalesce in places like that. So yeah, actually, speaking of some of those places, you've come up with some really interesting posts and things over the last, I don't know, couple of years now that I've been watching. And of course, my presence on Facebook is extremely limited. I stopped posting virtually at all maybe 2 or 3 years ago on any of the groups, because I was just, I found it very futile at that time. Those people who were interested in what I had to say, I already had one-on-one communication with them, and
Yeah.
other people basically were, they just, like you said, wanted to be keyboard warriors. So with that being said, though, I'm really impressed with your work. I think that you have such a brilliant mind and such a great and logistic and very like altruistically scientific way, meaning that science, the problem with it, of course, is that it's typically governed by money, and it's not very scientific the way that it's run these days on a large scale. But you're actually using good scientific method, as far as I'm concerned, and actually approaching things in a very logical way, trying to rule out various variables and controls that could be creating these various effects, and trying to, as best as possible, really narrow down on what the hell is happening. And that's something actually about your work that I appreciate. Where did you develop a lot of that attitude, and where did that come from?
Well, if we went right back to the start, I would say I developed that attitude by being raised Catholic. And well, I had a lot of questions about that, going to Sunday school, going to church, and I learned to be critically minded right away. And to be honest, it's a great blessing in the end, because it's brought me to an even deeper spirituality. Of course, I'm not a part of the Catholic Church, but it did help lead me back around to, what I would say is true and honest spirituality. So there's that. And from an alchemical perspective, I mean, Robert Bartlett has been such a huge influence on me. And I feel like he really, pushes that envelope of combining modern science, with his chemistry background, and then traditional alchemy, and flip-flopping back and forth, finding congruence in it. And I mean, some of my first experiences with alchemy and that type of approach were the biggest light bulb moments for me. They weren't necessarily from older texts, which I find brilliant as well, but just this modern approach. So many light bulbs went off, and then opened up these different ways of understanding my world around me, and finding that the real truth lies in the philosophy and the science being totally aligned. And to me, that has shown me so many false leads of alchemy. And there's always been false leads. Like, people have always struggled along the way, and that's the way it should be. I think that's, adversity is such a beautiful medicine and helper along the way. But I think that this is an opportunity that's unique to modern times right now, where we have this ability to kind of clarify the pathway by combining these two things and finding congruence, and maybe finding new discoveries or rediscoveries of things that have been long lost, or mostly shrouded in whatever obfuscation or whatever. There's so many things that have buried a lot of truths, I think. And again, I think that's the way things should be. Sometimes it's just the natural process, but it's this beautiful combination of science and alchemy that I'd say, again, Robert Bartlett really is the pinnacle of that influence for me, and people like yourself too. I found you probably maybe 2-3 years into jumping into alchemy and spagyrics, and your voice sounded a lot like his. You question things and use this, like, the scientific method, and a non-corporate way, use the basics of it, forge your own path too, which I've always respected, and found you steer into what to be true, what works for you, and through your own experience and testing that. And I find a lot of those same methods in your own path. So that's kind of what's pulled me into it in that way. But I've always been, I question things, which sometimes people don't like that, but I think it's important. I've just learned along the way how to do it in a certain manner, so it's not offensive or get lost in my own BS. Try to depersonalize it a little bit and be totally objective, even in respect to my own opinions and beliefs at the time.
Yeah, well, I think that that's one of the hardest tricks, actually, and those who master it, you can tell immediately, because it's like a clear light in an otherwise obfuscated universe of interesting musings on these topics. Well, yeah, one thing I wanted to say about what you just said is, first of all, I'm very honored to even have heard my own name come up in terms of some of your own experience. That's really awesome. But about Robert too,
Mhm.
it's no secret that he's a good friend of mine and a colleague of mine. He's definitely influenced my work like crazy. I remember the first time I ever met him, he was giving a talk at one of the international alchemy conferences on the thermal decomposition of the metal acetates. And, just the class alone was a mouthful. But then just seeing him talk and how fluidly and comfortably he was talking about these very advanced concepts that, especially at that time, were just completely over my head. I think this was, 2008, 2007, 2008.
Mhm.
I was just like blown away. But sitting there taking notes, I still got my handwritten notes of what he was talking about. And I still was like, wait, a metal acetate, like how do you go about creating that? It
Yeah.
took me many years to actually wrap my mind around the work and then to get enough familiarity with it to actually explore with it here in the laboratory and figure out, oh, okay, this is actually pretty cool. But the thing that really stood out about his work, just like it did to you, was how scientifically he approached this.
Mhm.
Everybody else at that conference was more or less pretty namby-pamby in the way that they were coming across with their work. And
Mhm.
I remember Art Kunken, God rest his soul, he's passed now. He was giving a presentation on what he felt to be was the Philosopher's Stone based on reading the Turba Philosophorum. And he thought that it had something to do with growing an actual tree on a radioactive area. And so he was taking uranium pitch blend and ripening pears on that uranium pitch blend and then eating it, thinking that that was actually going to be the key to his immortality. Now, he did live well into his 90s. So there may have been something to that, but that's definitely not at all.
Maybe not I mean, I think it's an interesting concept, the concept of liberating light and
Yeah,
energy, and maybe there's something to be said about evolution and reaching our highest peaks in opening up, like releasing light. But maybe doing it that way is a little bit rough around the edges.
it's definitely a little strange. I mean, he did get me into actually radiation hormesis and studying what I would refer to today as homeopathic radioactive therapy,
Mhm.
which I think is actually really interesting and really fascinating, especially for applications with cancer in particular. Um, but still, it's as completely separate from historical European and Arabic alchemy as
Yeah.
as talking about babies' diapers, for instance.
Yeah.
There's virtually no crossover. So yeah, it was really interesting to meet Robert. And did you actually go and study with him then at Spagyric Institute?
Yeah, and I met some amazing people there too, which I've kept in contact with till today. So I'm super thankful of that opportunity and hoping to get back down there as soon as I can. I wanted to this year, but of course there's some there's some trickiness to travel right now.
Yeah,
I really wanted to get down there, but yeah, I mean I did make it down once. I'm trying to remember what year it was now. It was quite a few years ago. I would say maybe 2016-ish. But he is he is such a gentle giant, that
yeah,
man. I mean, it is beautiful the way that he presents himself. He has no ego, but he is brilliant and so calm and gentle and open. And he, I think again, he's one of the biggest influences of my life, period. Let alone just alchemy, just
yeah,
to be a little bit more like that. It was really an energy that, felt very blessed to be around, to be in his
yeah.
space and see how he does things. And, can't say enough about the man.
I know. I feel the same way.
Mhm.
You pick yourself up a copy of his new book of antimony?
Oh, you betcha.
Yeah, me too. And I of course I have not read the whole thing. It's only been out for a month, and that book is like that
it's a
thick.
Bible, yeah.
Yeah. Um, but I thought that was so cool because it's the first book of its kind that I'm aware of where he includes not only his handwritten notes, and
Mhm.
that's really cool. It
Mhm.
almost is like half of a manuscript, the book, because of
Yeah.
that. but then you also have all of this GCMS and other spectrographic data that he has compiled from being an analytical chemist and having tested these materials for years and years and years and years.
Yeah.
So everything from, basic Kirkring's menstruum all the way up to, making fixed oil versus unfixed oil of antimony and seeing what those differences look like, taking a look at crystallization rates of different stages of making the star regulus. It was just mind-blowing, actually, how much data and how much information is contained inside of there. I was so glad that he was able to publish that, and I hope, because I don't know if he ever showed you, he's got actually about 25 2.5-inch thick binders.
Yeah,
just full of his notes and spectrographic data on everything.
On everything. No, I did look through those binders. We stayed up into the wee hours of the night, just smoking and sharing stories until basically class started the next day. And it's beautiful. And I think that the temper of herbs was kind of like, that first taste of for people to get a good amount of that. I suppose, in the way of the crucible, he has the appendix at the end, which he's analyzing different acetate path works and oil of gold. But now the world is getting this gigantic chunk, which I always hoped that he'd have the ability to publish, because who has done that? I don't think anybody else has to that degree. I'm sure there's been some of it, but his position with the equipment he had available to him and his life is so amazing in the way that it's unfolded. Working in an antimony mine at one point, clearly this man was meant to open these gates the way he is. And true. This book is just, sometimes I just hold it. I just like feel the weight of this thing. And I'm like, to feel how lucky I am at this point. I'm thinking about, imagine how all of the people who walked before us would feel in their graves, thinking about all of that in this one place, all the people that searched for answers through antimony and medicines through antimony. And now we have this gigantic tome of just so many, he just weaved together so many beautiful aspects of this work in an intelligible way. And now we can take that and take it further, which is his intention. He's never said, okay, it's done now. This is it. He's like, okay, now somebody else can find out more, and hopefully, we will now because of what he's done.
Yeah,
it'll be easier for us.
At least, in terms of spectrographic data, we have one of several hundred entries that need to be on. He recently came on the show, I don't know, maybe a month or two ago. And we were talking about that. In fact, that was basically like two alchemists nerding out that conversation. It was really hard to get an actual interview style with him. We were able to just talk about that, about how important it is to be able to produce lots of data and all different types of data and see where the data has discrepancies and where it overlaps, and be able to try and figure out what causes those things. Because, even still, I remember this must have been 2012. We went out there. I took my friend Regulus out there to make the star Regulus. I named him that. That was his nickname because he was obsessed, like Isaac Newton obsessed with making the star Regulus. And so I'm like, hey, you want to go do this? Let's go do it. And not only did Robert say, yeah, let's work on some antimony, but he also ended up pulling out all of the stuff to make some glass of antimony as well. And when it came out, the first thing he says is, oh, it turned out red today. And it was like, what do you mean today? And he was like, oh, it'll turn all different colors, really. And I was like, wow, really? I'd only ever seen it red and yellow. He's like, well, you just haven't made it enough then.
Blue even, that I had never heard of blue glass from antimony before until reading his work. And it's incredible, and you did the perfect impression of his just nonchalant, like he could solve the whole mystery of the universe and be like, oh, look at that, like
exactly. It's so true. Very unassuming in the way he comes across. It's so great. That's one of the things I admire most about him, though, is really just being engaged and detached simultaneously. That's a unique quality that I've never seen in someone.
Be humble.
Yeah, very humble. Well, you know what? It's time for our first break. When we come back, let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about you, a little bit more about your work and some of the things that you've been doing over in the lab that you find to be particularly interesting. And we'll just kind of dive into that a little bit more.
Sounds great.
Awesome. Stay tuned, folks.
Have you heard about our Spagyrics of the Month Club yet? As you probably know, we release 5 new Spagyrics each month. These range in the style of Spagyric Pharmacopoeia from tinctures, elixirs, essences, glyci, stones, and much more. But now, you can get your hands on all 5 new releases each month at just a fraction of the normal cost by being part of our Spagyrics of the Month Club. It's the very best way to inexpensively build your home Spagyric apothecary, and it's also the best way to support our research academy. Participating is easy. Sign up for the $75 a month subscription on our website, and we ship you a 4 ml size of all 5 newly released Spagyrics that month. And shipping's even included for all orders within the USA. The best part is, you just sign up once and sit back and receive your new Spagyrics delivered right to your door. It really doesn't get any easier. To get started or to learn more, go to phoenixaurelius.org and scroll down to the Spagyrics of the Month Club area on our homepage. As always, thanks so much for supporting our work.
All right, everybody, we're back. We're here with Daniel Wiseman. Before the break, we were talking about how he got into alchemy. We were talking about some of his inspirations and the ways even that he started approaching things very scientifically. And we ended with a little bit of chat, reminiscing about how much we both admire and respect Robert Bartlett. And, what we really want to talk about, though, is Daniel himself. So you have been doing alchemical work now on a, would you consider what you're doing, your alchemy work, on a professional level? I mean, I know that you've sold several products and that you still have a couple of products up on your site, I think, right?
Yeah. So yeah, the site's never been a strong point of mine. I'm not a, I've been very busy as a clinician, and that's why it's a little bit more hidden. And I haven't really repped myself in the retail world that much, because my focus really has been clinical practice. And just I'm very private about it. Like I like to work through word of mouth. I did have a brick and mortar clinic in Halifax, the capital city here in Nova Scotia, for a while, and that opened a lot of gates. Filled my books. So I really didn't have a lot of time to focus on any other aspects of promoting myself. It's only been the last few years where I've really tried to kind of add, to the table what I've been learning. So that's why, I haven't been as, as prominent out there. And I don't really, I don't really like to stick my head out there too much either. I like my private life, but yeah, I've been doing this professionally, I would say since about late 2011, 2012, working clinically specifically, and then, becoming a little bit more public about it in the last few years, teaching more, reaching out more online, which you mentioned earlier takes a lot of energy. So I kind of just,
Yeah.
I pop in and out, and I love making connections there. But I can't keep up with the amount of energy it takes to deal with social media. But, I just go in and out as I feel like there's something worth sharing. And that's been fun too, becoming a little bit more public about things.
Sure. That's really cool. So in your clinical practice, are you able to, with Canadian restrictions, actually include spagyric medicines in your clinical work?
Yeah, I work entirely with spagyric medicines. Regulation is always a bit of a pickle.
Sure.
It's something I have a big interest in. I'm a board member of both the Nova Scotia Herbalist Association and a federal association as well, the CCHA, Canadian Council of Herbalist Associations. And there I work specifically focused on regulation in Canada. So, I'm careful about the way I do things, mostly careful because, of course, we're dealing with people's lives. But then, of course, we have to think about the regulation side of things too. So patient to practitioner relationships are thankfully protected by, there's different regulations that protect that. So retail is a whole other thing. But essentially still, like, I'm responsible for myself. You know, if something goes wrong, I'm completely and utterly responsible for it. And I'm happy with that. I mean, we all should be responsible for our clinical practices, right? So I practice in a safe way. And thankfully, I've never had any issues of safety. You know, I mean, people can be sensitive and have, you know, difficult times in their healing. You know, sometimes it takes a while to work things out. So I'm sure you're familiar with it in your own clinical practice. But yeah, I do things safely and within what I'm confident, that realm of confidence. You know, I try not, I don't stretch outside of that for other people. You know, that's what I can do with myself. But nobody else. You know, I like to be responsible in that way. So it's a nice little niche as far as being somewhat protected to practice and constantly push for more rights in the right kind of way to pave the way for people, well, now and that will follow in clinical practice in Canada and elsewhere.
Yeah. Well, I think that that's absolutely awesome. I think that it's super great that you have the opportunity to work, you know, one-on-one with your clients and have the ability to work with Spagyria without too many oversights really getting in the way. Here in the United States, it's very gray water. So it's very, very difficult. This is part of what Robert has always struggled with.
FDA.
You know, yeah, exactly. They love to play whack-a-mole. So you have to do things just the right way. And if there were herbalists who were also trained as Spagyrists here in the United States, they can't legally be applying any sort of Spagyric medicine because it's not approved in any form of pharmacopoeia. However, if you know, rely on your training, give them capsuled herbs of the same herb or herbal formula that you're using, sure, no problem. And if you give them a tincture without salts, for instance, you can still use that. You start making Spagyric tinctures of that, though, it's like you really have to be careful. So
it's difficult. It's a difficult arena. I mean, everywhere in the world. I mean, Europe is even more strict in some countries.
It's true, yeah.
Some not so much, but I mean, many of the, you know, Western European countries, especially, they're very, very strict. Or some countries, Spagyrics, it's a bit more in the limelight, but in the sense that it's also highly regulated, you know, needing to be prescribed. So, I mean, this is our battle all over, right? And I think oftentimes when regulatory authorities go after things like this, I think it kind of it helps show that they're worth looking into. It's like, oh, feeling a little bit defensive, are you? Like, and to me, that says a lot. So, but we have to be careful. You know, we don't want to cut ourselves off and make this unavailable to people. So we have to play safe and try to work with these people too. You know, I try to see regulatory authorities as human beings too, although there's a certain non-human
very egregore aspect.
Oh yeah, the egregor of it is, you know, it's intimidating, and obviously oftentimes we're not feeling the same way, you know, people like us and with that greater soul of regulatory health authorities, but there are human beings within them. And just like I find everything else in my life, if you work one person at a time, just work with what's around you, you can make little subtle changes and people can make a difference from within the system, and you can make a difference from on the outside of it, interacting with that system. So I try to stay positive about it. I mean, I have a lot of opinions, of course, strong opinions, but at the same time, I try to be diplomatic and think about, okay, what's the end goal here? Let's not get in a senseless debate or stick your head out in a way that's not going to get you anywhere and limit yourself or waste energy. Let's move forward and be productive.
Yeah, that's the most important key. You and I are of the same mind in that regard. And in fact, a lot of regards. So, you know, do you find yourself in a position as a clinical herbalist actually working with many of the, what I might refer to as baser items of Spagyric Pharmacopoeia, like ethanol-based Spagyric tinctures and things like this? And if so, why do you find that those items that you might be working with in terms of baser are still effective? Because there's this tendency today to take a look at things that are only really advanced, say, you know, like pyrolytic stones and, you know, works like Lynn Osborne is putting out a lot of, and other things. and saying like, well, this is real alchemy and Spagyria is actually less than. You know, where do you sit with all of that? What's your own experience?
I love this question, and I love talking on this, and I've been trying to do more of it lately in my own work, and anytime people give me a chance to speak on it. So I don't think that these are lesser thans at all. You know, I think there's some nuances about modern Spagyria that may not be found in some of the older texts, and that is a reason in itself why people look down on them, of these like Spagyric tinctures in general. I mean,
Yeah.
people like Junius and Frater Albertus, they've kind of carved out some new ways using the same philosophy and principles, but the way I look at it is different doorways to the same room. And I mean, this comes down to, if we're talking about clinical therapeutic use, or even if we're talking about personal use of these substances, we have to think about like, what is our goal in what we're doing here? So if we have something, love the word base that you used here, or I often use the word fixed. I'm sure you use it as well. If we have an issue which is predominantly in the physical body, we have a fixed issue. This is traditional knowledge, a fixed disease and a volatile disease, and the full spectrum of that from A to Z, back again. So I think there is a place for all these different preparations, whether it be the most advanced works or these very simple tinctures. I don't like using the word crude. I don't like using I don't even like differentiating between spagyrics and alchemy, like, oh, this is a spagyric product and this is alchemical, because, you know, I disagree with Jean Dubois and he made the comment that I think maybe Frater Albertus did as well, that an alchemical product is something that has been changed by the process, and therefore a spagyric tincture is not that, but some of these more advanced works are. That's just chemically false. You know, we can just prove that empirically. This is chemically false. The most basic of spagyric preparations, like an ethanolic tincture, the end product is something new that was not contained in any of the pieces that you used to put them together. So sure, it's simple, sure, it's easier, but to say that it's lesser than, it is false. And sometimes, honestly, it's the best option. And if we're talking about people's health and in clinical practice, when people are coming to you to help work on their health, they often have a lot of things which are bodily in origin. Therefore, they require that gateway to be entered first. Maybe there'll be, of course, there's always going to be other things as well. Different doorways you want to enter into the person. That's where you can get fancy with your formulation or different types of preparations. But these entry-level spagyrics are hugely powerful. And I think we have the chemistry to show why, and certainly they are new things. So if we're talking about the definition of alchemy being to take these parts, you know, take things apart, and when you put them back together, forming this alchemical child, something new, well, the most basic of spagyric preparations does exactly that. So
yeah, well, that's cool. Again, you and I are of the same mind there, because that's exactly what I've seen. You know, I oftentimes get criticized for my work these days because the majority of what I make available are spagyric tinctures, spagyric essences, spagyric elixirs, things like this. And people will say, oh, well, you're not performing real alchemy. And it's like, whoa. I don't know where you came up with that idea. Come visit my lab and I'll show you all the other things that we're working on besides what we're doing commercially. And you'll get a whole different sense of what I'm doing. But at the same time, I've been able to take a look at these very, you know, like I say, baser preparations or whatever, entry-level preparations, and seeing that they have immense value and that they are infinitely more potent and able to be worked inside of a clinical environment in a way that not only decreases the amount of herb that needs to be used, but it also enhances and decreases the cost overall of the individual that needs to be taking it in almost every instance, if it's, you know, I can't use the term prescribed, but if it's applied properly. Which I think is really important. You know, people like you and I who are largely agricultural know that it takes an enormous amount of space to even produce enough lavender to get any significant amount of essential oil, if that's what you're going to be producing. And they have no sense, just because of modern day economics, when you can go to the store and even buy a certified organic, lavender essential oil, 15 mil for, 30 American or 35 Canadian or whatever, that's their sense of value on it. And it's like, try growing it and then put the time into distilling it. And you'll see that it's enormous. And so for me, having done that for so many years, it's like, you really have to be smart with the amount of herb that you actually have available, unless you want to be a full-time farmer, in which case you wouldn't have the opportunity to be doing alchemy full-time as well.
Yeah, I've tried to dance both paths, and I've realized you can't you can a little bit, and I know that you've done some of that yourself, and you do have to find a healthy balance of that. And it's just, it shocks me sometimes, the price of certain products you see, or organic, fair trade, dried turmeric root for $6 a pound, and it's like, have you ever grown a root crop before? And then to do it to the degree that I know you do it as well. I would, like, with my agriculture, working with biodynamics or just an astrodynamic method of farming, of harvesting, with the whole process of agriculture, and then going straight into the spagyric process, the amount of work that's done. And then somebody wants to pay $10 for something that took like 12 months of your life, your blood, sweat, and tears. And the sustainability factor, it's huge. Like, we have to think about taking less from this planet to do more with it, or else we're going to run out. It's very simple math.
Yes.
And I think you made a great point about, the advancements that spagyric medicines have in bioavailability. That's the whole point. That's what pharmacology does as well with pharmaceutical medications. They try to find ways to make drugs more potent, more bioavailable, so you can take less of them and they have less side effects. And the same is very, very, very true of spagyrics. And they have very, very common points where they meet, and they do very similar things, pharmaceutical ideas and actions and spagyric actions, where we're all trying to get past, first pass digestion or metabolism to get these substances into the body and have them used on demand by the body as we see fit, like hit the targets that we want and not the ones that we don't.
Exactly.
And to be able to do that with less, it's better for everything. It's better for the planet. It's better for people's bodies. You have more medicine left in the end. Like, it's just mathematically sensical. It's moral and ethical. I think we have a responsibility to do these things, for a multitude of reasons.
Yeah, me too. I think the more experience that people get in those types of fields, the more they'll come to that same conclusion, actually, because, these people who are selling turmeric for, like you were saying, $6 a pound or whatever it is, it's preposterous how much slavery is actually going into that to make it available at that price somewhere in the developed world.
Yeah,
and
it's horrible.
So it's really important to get a grip on ethics. And it's like, if you're not willing to do it, why would you feel that somebody else should be doing that for 20 cents, farming these things and taking up all of the space and everything else. So I think that that's really a pretty critical factor. And again, let's actually talk about this, because I believe it was you, correct me if I'm wrong, that actually pointed out recently, maybe within the past 3 to 6 months, that you have found that when you take ethanolic spagyric tincture, for instance, the higher the ethanol content, the less the water content, the greater esterification that you get of that tincture when you're adding spagyric salts back into it, or potassium carbonate back into the tincture. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And that's the first step. We know that's how esterification happens. It is dependent upon the lack of water, that the rate of conversion of things like terpenes into esters, this combination of acids and ethanol combining together, becoming more water soluble. That's a step in creating some beautiful substances, which are much more bioavailable, that are they're acting a lot like some types of pharmaceuticals. And
it's
then
the
even
same science, actually.
it
Very
is the
same science.
exact same science. You know, if you look at, you take a bottle of ibuprofen and you look at it and the ingredients say free acid and potassium salt. It is identical. Like, I mean, in this case, it's not always this way with prodrugs like ibuprofen, but in this
Right.
case, it's literally the same salt. You know, and potassium is arguably one of, if not the most important electrolyte in the body. So what better taxi cab to put our medicines inside of than potassium? And well, nature gave it to us exactly that way. And then beyond the esters too, you know, the salts that are created in the process too, the carboxylic acid salts, when you're taking these oily compounds and they're meeting with a salt body and forming aggregate compounds that, you know, often they actually drop out of solution. And I was interested to see in some of your menus where you're using redissolving some of these salts that don't dissolve in preparations, which I think is groundbreaking work. You know, we're seeing Warren at Evolved Alchemy doing similar things. I do the same thing. Like, these are very, very valuable compounds. And, you know, so many people think, oh, it's done, or the salt is absorbed into the tincture. And it's like, well, not entirely. And actually, some of the most important and interesting compounds created in this process are found in those salts. But all of this is as a result of a lack of water. You know, you see all these references in alchemical texts to evil waters.
Yeah.
You know, and you have to wonder, like, I mean, is this what they're speaking of, you know, in a philosophical or allegorical way? But now we see a chemical reality to this. This is actually hindering the alchemical marriage of, you have oils and salt, you know, acids and alkali.
You know, I think that this is really important. And this is actually what we need to get across, because so many of my colleagues today, especially who come from herbalism and then practice alchemy, have quote unquote ideal ratios for their menstruum based on the herb. And they're taking this largely from analytical data of tinctures that have been made through an herbalist paradigm of, say, taking a dried herb, adding 40% water and 60% ethanol and using that as the menstruum to tincture it, and then finding this wide spectrum of phytochemical components and saying, because this has the most phytochemical components, it is therefore the best, which is one way of looking at it. But then what we're finding as alchemists, especially, you know, when we read Paracelsian works, or when we read the works of, say, John French or Raymond Lilly or any of these others, they were clearly working to constantly develop non-polar solvents, where we can find that the less polar something is, the more esterification actually that ends up happening, even if they didn't end up having those terms, right?
Yeah.
So we would find that people like Paracelsus obsessed, and you know, the Paracelsus II, or what historically is referred to as Basil Valentine, who I really think is a posthumous publication of Paracelsian works. What we end up seeing is that we're creating all of these different non-polar solvents in circulata, like the fiery spirit of Basil Valentine, for instance, that end up creating absolutely no water in the final product to be able to create these different types of extractions. And the less of that we see when we're adding back salts to it, whether that be potassium carbonate, potassium acetate, or some other form of salt that is indigenous to the material being extracted, we begin to see unique changes that happen only when that salt is added back.
Absolutely. No, it's an amazing point, you know, and it's just the truth. I mean, it's chemically true. It's philosophically true. If we, again, this merging of these two different pathways, philosophy and science. And, you know, there's something to be said too about what we don't take when, you know, this idea of getting absolutely every single compound out of something. Well, let's look at water soluble compounds. We find a lot of allergens here, proteins, sugars, fats. And also what we find is largely a lot of macronutritional compounds rather than these really strong, powerful therapeutic principles. And realistically, like if we're looking for macronutritional principles, well, then we should be eating plants. We don't get a dose of iron from like an ethanolic tincture, even if it's 40% alcohol and 60% water. The idea of getting nutritional value from tinctures, I think, is just, I mean, it's not logical. And then on top of it, again, there is this ability to remove a lot of things that bother people. I've found in my clinical practice that focusing more on these ethanolic, at least at the beginning, I mean, there's many ways we can go down the pathway after that, but, extracting with ethanol and removing some of these macronutritional compounds, we see sensitivities drop big time. And the other thing too, which is interesting in research, is I've come across research from a company called Rutland's Biodynamics that they make fresh plant tinctures. And in their research, they found that they actually are able to preserve more of these macronutritional compounds by not drying, and that the active compounds of plants will bond with fats and proteins and lipids and become more bioavailable that way. So they found some benefit to that in one sense, but in Spagyrics, we have the salt. We don't need these compounds, these macronutritional compounds, as surfactants any longer. And I would say it's better because it's more balanced. I mean, if we're trying to find homeostasis in general, I mean, with Spagyrics, you have an acid, an alkali, and a neutral, right? You have all three principles, scientifically speaking. If you're banking on a fresh plant tincture with a conventional method with no salt, you have an acid, a neutral, and an acid. The macronutritional compounds are acidic, and the therapeutic compounds are acidic, and the ethanol, the co-surfactant, is neutral. But now you still have an imbalanced equation. You have something that's predominantly acidic, and you have a bunch of things that are known to be, again, allergens or cause sensitivities in people. And again, Spagyrics doesn't need it. We can dry the plants, and we can bank on the salt being that taxi cab for our medicine. And even better, when the body enzymatically chops up these aggregate compounds, the potassium salt is an ionic compound. It has a negative charge, and it works as a scrubber, right? Yeah. It grabs onto positively charged pathogens or heavy metals. It acts as a chelating agent. So we have this dual effect of getting the therapeutic principles into our body, and then also cleaning our body with the potassium salt. And you don't have that with the conventional tinctures. Although, yeah, there's an amazing benefit found through Rutland's research. And, I'm not trying to put it down. These are different ways. And I think we could all learn from this research and move forward. And I quite like their tinctures. They feel good. They taste good. I use them in a clinic that I work in, like at a school. But I do think that the Spagyric method has something magic to it that it does not. And this absence of water is huge, at least in the beginning. Again, I think there's ways that you can go down further pathways of using water later in the process in very specific ways to make more full spectrum extracts, to make use of these water soluble salts that are created in the marriage as well. Yeah. And they can be used by themselves. They can be combined together. But now that marriage has been completed, the water was eliminated from the point where you needed it chemically, and you can find different ways to work with them. You have to be careful still, though, of course, because water can start to undo the magic if it's the wrong pH, like if it's acidic or if it's alkali.
It's not structured properly, then
not structured properly. Yeah, it's a good point. So there's still, there's a lot of nuances to be careful about with the entry of water into the equation, even later in the works. But these are really interesting things.
Very interesting things. You know what? Let's go ahead and give the audience a chance to breathe for a sec. We're going to go to a break. When we come back, we'll dive right back in because I've got a number of other fun talking points that we can discuss. So stay tuned, folks.
Perhaps you've heard Phoenix speak about alchemy and Spagyria, and you yourself want to start practicing? Phoenix has been engaged in more than 15 years of consistent split tests in order to find the most practical and standardized methods to create the highest quality items of Spagyric Pharmacopoeia possible. He provides the most detailed multimedia courses in existence, walking you through every aspect of Spagyria, including beginning theory, setting up your lab, proper technique, important details on how to make a Spagyric like a pro, tips for advanced practice, alchemical and hermetic applications, astrological theory, and so much more. In any of his online courses, you will be thoroughly guided through making your own items of Spagyric Pharmacopoeia, including Spagyric tinctures, Spagyric elixirs, Spagyric essences, Spagyric stones, and so much more. You will be able to set up your own laboratory in your home or business and craft up your very own alchemical apothecary in no time flat. To learn more about our online courses, simply visit www.phoenixaurelius.org/online courses and begin your Spagyric journey today. And as an Alchemi-Culture podcast listener, you get to save 15% off the tuition of any course by entering the coupon code TEACHME15 at checkout. Again, that is coupon code TEACHME15, which will save you a whole 15% off any of Phoenix's online courses. As always, all proceeds go towards supporting this podcast and furthering our research.
Welcome back, everybody. We're back from the break. Again, we're here with Daniel Wiseman. We've been chatting about shop during this last little section, actually, talking about alchemy, talking a lot about esterification, talking about the importance of spagyric salts and the entire principle of salt. I guess before I go any further, I just want to say that, when we're talking about salt within most cases of vegetable alchemical works or spagyric works, what we're really talking about is potassium carbonate. And at a later phase, a quote unquote more advanced or more involved phase, we're also dealing with potassium acetate. I personally was always trained. I don't know if you received this. Did you ever study the Jean Dubuis Philosophers of Nature curriculum at all?
Yeah, I quite like it.
Okay. So in there, Dubuis was like very, very adamant that once you have leached all of the potassium carbonate that you can using water alone, that you then use vinegar, right?
Yeah. The fixed salts are insoluble salts.
Exactly. Which I think is one of the most important things. And in the curriculum that I teach all of my students and have taught, maybe this is relatively new. I didn't teach this from, 2005 when I first started teaching. This was like maybe in the last 5 years or so that I started teaching this, is not only should we strive to get that vinegar soluble, but if you have the technology and you know how to do it, try and get as much acetic acid in there as possible to open that up and get as much of the potassium acetate. The interesting thing is that obviously potassium carbonate is not soluble in ethanol at all. So when we add this to our tincture, what we're relying on is the iatrochemical reactions between the alkali of the potassium carbonate and any of the acids and or terpenes that are found inside. I guess terpenes could be considered an acid in most cases, actually creating those plant esters. Whereas with potassium acetate, it actually does dissolve into the ethanol, and it creates some sort of extra je ne sais quoi that I don't even know chemically that I have terms to understand. I don't even know what to look for when I'm analyzing these things over here on my end with intrinsic data field technology. Do you have any idea what's going on with this?
Yeah, I've been doing some of that work as well, and it's an area of question for me in a lot of ways, but it's clear to me that it's of high value. I mean, not only are we able to get some potassium acetate, but we're pulling tiny amounts of acetates of other minerals and metals as well that the water wouldn't grab. Maybe we're pulling zinc out,
calcium,
or the
zinc,
calcium. There are so many things, and many of these minerals are, in acetate form are used as supplements. So right there, if we can create soluble forms of minerals, this is a way to pull some micronutritional compounds into our tinctures. And of course, it's part of the body of this plant. So if we're leaving it behind, it's like, well, I like to have all my limbs personally, all my fingers, my toes, my eyes, my ears. I like to have it all. And to be holistic and to be true to the philosophy, I think we have to make sure that we're not leaving things behind that should be included. So that's interesting, the way of using acetic acid to pull these out. And something that I've also experimented with as well is, depending on your batch size, of course, is you can work the acetate path with this method. You can go fully into creating another spirit, oil, and salt by using acetic acid to pull out from the ashes after the water extraction. And you can have a whole new tria prima that can be also included into the tincture and open up another level of the, fractal reality of spagyric medicine. So these are some pathways that I've been exploring as well. Chemistry wise, I've got some big question marks, like what what collaborations are made, because we have to assume that these salts dissolving into solution are going to have some pairings perhaps that happen between them and the existing compounds in our original tincture. What are those? I'm not quite sure. And then in solid extracts, they're quite efficient at making very beautiful stones too, right? We can impregnate these salts with oils or tinctures and grow beautiful stones, and they're being soluble together. They work quite well. There's always that issue of potassium carbonate and not being ethanol soluble, and finding homogeny in an end product can be quite difficult. Acetate salts, not so much. They really agree.
No issue whatsoever.
Exactly.
It's interesting because by definition, a spagyric or an alchemical stone should be something that is neither soluble in water, which is interesting because potassium acetate is soluble in both. It's soluble in water. It's also soluble in ethanol. But it should be neither soluble in water by the time you finish it, nor should it be able to smoke when put, or have any exhaust when put over a flame, so that neither fire nor water are able to have an effect on it. I've been able to make stones that fire are not able to affect with potassium carbonate. I've been able to make many stones that water is not able to affect with potassium acetate. But if I take a potassium acetate stone and put it over the fire, maybe it's just that I'm not incubating long enough. I don't know. These things are different for every plant. And so, my trials are constantly underway to try and do this. But to date, I've not been able to come up with one that fire isn't able to melt. And it's like, damn it. And,
all that work.
Exactly. And then simultaneously, water over time does indeed, like if I leave it submerged for 5 minutes, no problem. With most cases with a potassium carbonate stone, especially using the same style that Jean Dubuis used for the caraway stone of eternity. When I make my stones, that's pretty much, so they all have some form of what I call rarefied fixed sulfur in it. Maybe it's going to be the water soluble, maybe it's not water soluble fixed sulfur. It's really difficult to tell. That's dependent on each and every herb that I've worked on. But, if I leave them in there for 3 or 4 days, sure enough, the whole thing starts to fall apart to a certain degree.
Yeah.
It starts to dissolve. So I've never found something that truly fits that definition. But then again, we've not ever seen anybody actually discover these things or write about them, like, hey, I left this stone submerged for 2 weeks, in an incubator at 40 degrees Celsius in 500 milliliters of water. What happened? I've never seen anybody really post information like that in the modern day, and it's certainly not written about in any of the older books. And we have to keep in mind that Jean Dubuis had this penchant, this strong penchant for exaggeration. I mean,
yeah, we got to take it with a grain of salt, and I didn't see any pictures of him succeeding either, right? Or anybody around him saying, yeah, I saw this, we did this in a class. So we have to question that. We don't have, we don't want to assume he's a liar or something, but there's certainly a lot of stretches. And I think that could be helpful too. It pushes people to push further into things and see if they could figure it out. Personally, I haven't had 100% success either. I've had a lot of the same results as you. In my mind, I feel like it's probably creating some sort of mineral or metallic substance to make sense of not dissolving and not burning. And that could be whole in itself, because of course, although we may have started with some plant oils, in the end, we know that minerals and metals can produce their own salt, sulfur, and mercury. So I feel like that end product at some point is some sort of mineral or metallic product that has a very, very, very strong capability to perform the way that the stone is supposed to perform, extract other things. So I wonder if that's it. And is it one thing? Like, is it one mineral? Is it a multitude of things that share common attributes? I'm not sure. I haven't been to the end of that road yet, but it makes me really question it. And again, just like yourself, I've noted that I'm not seeing anybody prove it and show it, which pushes me even further. Like, okay, come on, let's do this. Is it true? Or
exactly.
Like, or is it not? Because we could maybe it's not true, and we'll be searching forever for it. But I think there's some pretty good hints that there was success somewhere along the way. Hopefully somebody's telling the truth. And I think chemically speaking that, yeah, there should be substances like that can do that. I mean, like gold doesn't smoke and it doesn't dissolve into water. Now, gold alone isn't going to produce some of the other results of, the attributes of the stone. But, we've got things that do similar, like have similar attributes there. We just have to find something that does it all.
Yeah.
And through these processes. So more work to be done.
Always more work to be done.
Yeah.
So, anybody who's watched any of my YouTube videos, and especially those of you who've watched one of my YouTube videos talking about how I like to best extract mushrooms with ethyl acetate. In fact, I've been playing around for about 2 years now, extracting a wide variety of different substances with ethyl acetate. I found that it can even produce on certain crystals like rose quartz and clear crystal quartz and amethyst and citrine and other quartz-based and silica-based minerals. It can pull an interesting fraction out of those as well, which isn't that surprising actually, because in John H. Reed's book, he was producing what I think is more or less a type of ethyl acetate, which would have been John H. Reed's vegetable alkahest.
Yeah, it's with a spin on it though, I'm close with John, and another huge influence of mine. And I would say it's ethyl acetate with a bit of the products of pyrolysis as well. I think perhaps the most important thing is the acidic phlegm, because he doesn't drive it to full pyrolysis. But if you read very carefully, I believe it's probably the acidic phlegm that comes over that lends itself to mineral and gemstone work.
Me too. And also his use where he's adding the salts in after distilling everything. He's basically treating it like it's a spagyric tincture itself. And I think that there's something in that process that is actually acidifying the material in order to make it more useful towards the mineral kingdom. Because I'm not able, based on his alkahest that I've used and based on just pure commercial grade ethyl acetate, I get two entirely different results actually with the minerals.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And something he's noted too, and I've worked this method quite a bit, is that, you could actually succeed with this method with just plain ethanol, so there's a lot to be discovered here. Now it produces something different than ethyl acetate does, or if you use just acetic acid, it's not to say that it's fruitless to proceed with this more arduous path of creating his vegetable alkahest, but something that piqued my interest about it is it has some similarities to Kirkring's menstruum in the sense that you're mineralizing your solvent, right? So then pulling it from one kingdom into another, making a bridge substance, which is so important for making potable medicines. And personally, like I feel like some of this gemstone work has a lot to do with not so much the silica that is the base body of whatever rose quartz, amethyst, citrine.
Right.
He's talking about rose quartz, but it's things like iron that are bringing that color, that red color into it. And then we could think of the chemistry of acetates or oxides, sulfides, whatever. It depends how we're working it, but we could think about how those things react with different menstrua and what we could produce from them in that sense.
That's an interesting chemical lead, actually, and something that I'd not thought about is what chemical agents are creating that coloring, because that's stuff that is known. and then seeing if various things, like for instance, you might find a trisulfide extracts with that type of solvent very easily, whereas you know, if it is an oxide, for instance, it may not have any sort of reaction whatsoever.
Yeah,
or a
absolutely.
different reaction. So that's really interesting. You've really turned me on to something there. I'm going to pay attention to that here henceforth. So as we apply this, though, to the vegetable kingdom, I'm still playing around with a lot of things, as I'm sure you are. I haven't arrived on anything conclusive, where the best method to produce a spagyric product from an acid, or from ethyl acetate. Typically, I think we both agree that the extraction of the herbal material happens with the ethyl acetate. But then from there, after we filter out that herb, I remember you and I having a short discussion online about actually adding the salts directly in to that ethyl acetate. But then when you distill out the ethyl acetate after that, in order to create your product, of course you filter it to get all that crude potassium carbonate material out. But then after that filtration, once you distill out the ethyl acetate, you're pretty much left, you're resolved, as far as I can tell, at keeping that as a type of spagyric pitch. And you can maybe freeze dry it or even dry it out lightly in a dehydrator, put it in a capsule, apply it. It's not very water soluble. Some of it is, but not all of it. It's not 100% water soluble. So then we also discussed, you know, some of the things that I was doing, which was making a tincture with the ethyl acetate, filtering out the biomass, and then distilling out the ethyl acetate after that, and then dissolving it in ethanol, and then adding the spagyric salts. But you made an important point. And when I do that, there's a lot of precipitate that comes out.
Yeah.
That precipitate happens just like it would if you were to make a water-soluble extract of something and add ethanol into it to change the acidity. Now you get, you know, all sorts of different types of lipids and other things being able
falling out
of suspension. I have noted, though, that there is definitely a difference both in the potency as well as in the color and the saturation of a tincture made in that method with the ethanol soluble components versus just an ethanol soluble tincture of the same herb. So, and then I've also noted that all of those things, they're typically polysaccharides and lipids that fall out of suspension. Those seem to be medicinal as well. And those are water soluble for the most part.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because in one work, there are so many pathways that are available. Have you landed on anything or any interesting way to work with ethyl acetate work in such a way that you feel good about it?
Yeah, I mean, you make some great points, and I've explored all these methods as well. And again, I think a lot of the time it comes down to what's your end goal with the type of extract, because I've noted too, even with the precipitation of redissolving into ethanol, even though you're losing some things behind, it's markedly different than just a basic ethanolic spagyric tincture. Also too, I mean, if you go into PubMed and do some research into herbal extracts, there are quite a few studies that show that the ethyl acetate extract of all methanol, ethanol, aqueous, ethyl acetate outperforms very often. And in some cases, it's the only one that performs. There's a particular example with using teasel root and looking at how effective it is at treating Lyme disease, I believe. And ethyl acetate was the only one that worked. You know, it's this famous herb that's been used for Lyme, quite a, you know, conundrum in itself. And we showed that, you know, if that basic hydroethanolic or ethanolic tinctures, in this case of the study, what they're looking at now, there's only a few variables they're looking at. It's not the totality of the subject, but they weren't effective. But ethyl acetate was, you know, and I think the beauty of this is that we're having a fixed and a volatile sulfur taken and pulled into the mix in a more evolved way. We're not having to resort to water. Again, this evil water, we're able to get both fixed and volatile components, and through numerous pathways, react with the salt. Personally, I definitely have found that my most favorite, most potent extracts made this way were solid extracts. And the best ones I found were in, most of the time I was doing the same thing as yourself. I was removing the undissolved potassium carbonate salts. But what I found is that by circulating over and over or refluxing, particularly under vacuum as well, and then evaporating down to a hard stone and keeping all of the potassium salts, that allowed for water solubility. And those stones, like, they're very, very, let's call them a rudimentary kind of stone in a sense, but these solid extracts or, a spagyric pitch of sort, they are super potent. They are really, really, really potent as very bodily fixed medicines, and you have a very good solubility rate into water, whereas some of the other methods you'll see they come apart. Some things are water soluble, but then you'll see an oily scum on the top of your water. So okay, well, this aspect of the medicine wasn't perfectly married. It hasn't become homogeneous with the salt, and therefore it's falling out of solution when you add it to water. But keeping all of that salt, evaporating down to a solid stone or extract after, long circulation, gentle circulation, or personally, I'm a big fan of using vacuum and doing reflux at low temperatures under vacuum to give a good, strong reaction. Wait until you don't see any signs of reaction any longer, the off-gassing, decarboxylation reactions like that. You see that bubbling, right? You see the colors change. And then evaporating down at that point to remove the ethyl acetate. Those are some potent solid extracts. Now, every single herb, every single mushroom will finish up at a different sort of consistency. And then you have to think about dosage and how am I going to give this to somebody if it's kind of gunky? How are we going to standardize this, especially when they're quite potent, so you don't need a lot. So there's a lot of questions about the use of it in that way. Some I've had really great success in actually just dissolving into water and then adding ethanol to preserve. And sometimes you get some unwanted reactions when that ethanol goes in there. So you have to find the point where it's the least amount of ethanol, but you have a good amount of preservative effect. Then you can standardize it as a liquid, which I find is always easier for user friendliness. But that keeping all of that salt and evaporating down onto it has been, to me, the most interesting end product that I've found from these numerous paths, which are all valid in their own respect.
That's really fascinating. As I'm going through that in my head, there's two things that stand out. One, you pretty much want to work with a wide mouth vessel, like a flange vessel.
You have to.
Flange vessel and silicone spatulas are going to be your best friend.
To get it out. I mean, it's gunk, right? And I try to work with wide mouth as often as I can to just avoid the torture of cleaning 2440 joints.
Seriously. So with that being said, the next thing is that if you were to circulate under vacuum and keep all of the potassium carbonate in, I think that would create a very hyper concentrated substance to where, now, do you ever check the pH of these things when you're reconstituting with water? Is that what you are using as your guide?
Totally. And I'm going for a neutral pH as a final product. So sometimes I've found that it has naturally gone there, depending on the herb or the mushroom working with. In fact, like, surprisingly, you'll find that more often than I expected to. In other cases, I'll buffer the pH. Oftentimes you're finding a bit higher alkali rating than you'd want to for consuming. So, use some acetic acid and bring it down into a neutral zone. Watch what happens too. Like, do we have another precipitation? Does something else fall out? I've found, and now I haven't done this with a ton of different herbs and mushrooms, like not dozens and dozens, but maybe 10 or 20 different things. A lot of them work quite well to bring it down into a neutral zone. And then there are some that find that perfect balance all on their own, which is like this glorious moment of like, okay, like this is valid. Like this worked.
This is like a pathway that this herb is perfectly suited for.
Yeah, exactly. By whatever the natural ratios of acids and alkalis contained in the herb, and then the mix of the ethyl acetate. It works sometimes, and surprisingly more often than not. So that's I would definitely implore you to jump into that a little bit more, because it's super interesting end result and very, very powerful stuff.
Yeah, I can only imagine, actually. That's one thing that I have not done. In fact, typically I've got lots of different reflux glassware. I even have these little miniature pelicans that I've had made for me. That's just like a 2440, just center portion of the pelican for me, so that I can put those onto all sorts of flasks. I don't play under vacuum a whole lot, though. So that might be something that I would consider, because I think that you can actually create significantly different changes inside of materials when there is an absence of oxygen and higher quantity of pressure.
As far as we talked a lot about combining science and philosophy here, I consider a vacuum environment to be a true hermetic seal.
Sure.
This is really removing everything except for the substance that we're working with. And chemically speaking, you can see it, you can feel it. And in some of the rudimentary lab work that I've done and others have done, you can test it and you can see that there is something unique to it. So vacuum is an amazing thing to work with. And, obviously we see some rudimentary methods of getting there in old texts. And now we have the beauty of vacuum regulators and all kinds of different vacuum pumps and glassware that can handle that type of negative pressure. So we've got the tricks and tools, and we could also do it with a simple little hand pump that people bleed their brakes with, from the hardware store, $20-$30, you're going to get tennis elbow, which I remember I did that for years.
I did that too for the first couple of years.
Yeah. Try doing that on like a 20-liter flask and get it under a high vacuum.
No thanks. Not
Hours.
Even interested. I've got a couple of 20 liters back here behind me, and I would never do that. That shit's for the birds. So in terms of vacuum pumps that you like to work with, are you finding that oilless pumps are really good for the lab, or do you use an oiled pump? What do you like to use? Because I know that there's a whole lot of difference in terms of how often the oil is going to need to be changed, and also if you have if it's not venting somewhere, that oil will eventually mist out and distill on its own into the ambient environment, unless that's why that's actually the reason why I'm not using a lot of it. The only vacuum pump that I have in the lab right now is set up over by a window where I have an exhaust pipe for it running out the window,
pulling it out.
Exactly.
Oil mist is ugly and I hate it for that reason. But so my opinion, I like both. Now, so your oil pumps like rotary vane and these different types of oil pumps, they draw a harder vacuum. They can go further, than an oil-free pump. So I would say using a really good one with a filter for the misting. You can get really nice ones with filters that go onto them. It is definitely more money, but it's worth it because you don't cover your entire house and self with a mist of oil, which is no fun. And you don't have to use a window. But I feel like they are best used with a vacuum regulator. So this is a little bit more of a high-end, more expensive system. They are beautiful because they can run continuous, right? You don't have to turn them off. They can handle it, particularly if you are running a vacuum regulator with them. So if you need something for constant vacuum, that's what you want. Now, there's something to be said about the art of sealing a system. So if you're really good at sealing a system, you can use an oil-free pump, which, to be honest, I use them more often than not. There's no maintenance with the oil. They're easy to kind of service yourself. Sometimes you get a little, you have to be careful with them. You don't want to be pulling liquids into them, of course. Dust can get into them and then get into the little seals in the pumps inside. But you can just open it up and clean them out and make sure everything's sealed up properly. And then you could pull a really strong vacuum, not to say like 30 inches mercury or something, but something very, very close, let's say 25 or even a little bit higher. and then seal off that vacuum in the system, as long as you've got a system that, of course, can handle that negative pressure. And if you do a good job of sealing it up, then it can maintain that at least as long as you need. And, I find for a lot of preparations, like somewhere between 12 and 40 hours is all you really need to fully react these different preparations. And I can maintain that vacuum and not lose any of it in 12 to 40 hours if I do a very delicate job of sealing up all of the joints, reducing the amount of joints that you have, and using the oil-free pump. You turn it on for a couple minutes to get to the point you want to reach, and then you turn it off and you're good to go. So I love the oil-free pumps. They're sometimes a little more expensive, but there's some affordable ones, like $400 or $500, and I use them more than any other pump for sure.
Super cool, man. Super cool. Well, it's definitely inspired me to get an oil-free pump and start playing with that a little bit more, especially with some of the reflux. I've got ridiculous amounts of great labware that's meant for it, so I should probably start experimenting more in that arena. All right, brother. Well, we've essentially come to the end of our time, but what I want to do before we go is to give you an opportunity to tell the entire audience where they can get a hold of you, especially, do you work with long distance clients? Can you work with long distance clients? Things like that, because I know that people are going to be impressed with you and want to search you out.
Yeah, so I mean, especially in the last couple of years, I do a lot of online work. Where a lot of us have been quite limited to that. So I do distance consultation one-on-one with people. The best place to find me at the present moment is my personal Instagram. I'm right in the midst of relaunching. My website's up, but it's about to be relaunched in a brand new way. I'm about to change things up a little bit. I'm going to make myself a little bit more available in some of my more unique work, and really offer some more of my like artisanal products, rather than just the clinical side of things. But my personal Instagram, which is alchemia.arcadia, that's probably the best way to catch me in this kind of in-between phase. And my website is there as well, and there'll be a new Instagram soon. My website is www.secret-fire.com. So secret-fire.com, and that site will remain live. It's just about to change as well. So that's another way that people can contact me, and start up a chat, if they're interested in what I'm talking about or interested in consultation. I'm always happy to help wherever I can.
Absolutely awesome. Daniel, it's really been a pleasure chatting with you. I think that more of us alchemists in these times need to have more chats like this. This will, make it available. If when I was starting to learn about this work, if I could have accessed a YouTube video like people will be able to access of this, like, oh my God, I could have advanced my work so fast and so well. It would have been just a dream come true, really.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. It's hundreds monkey syndrome, and I love to share. And I think that's something new. A lot of alchemists hold their cards really tight, and I understand in some ways, but I love to share in the right circumstances, in the right way. And I want people to rise up quickly and then surpass these things we're talking about. Let's keep going, like it's not about ego. Like let's continue to move forward in that logarithmic spiral. Let's get quicker and closer. Right. So I love to have opportunities like this, and it's a brilliant opportunity in modern times to get so much so quickly. I think that's the uniqueness of this, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just hold on to your pants, because sometimes it goes so fast.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Well, Daniel, again, thank you so much, my friend. It's been a real pleasure.
Oh, likewise. Thanks so much for having me on. It's an honor to come on your show and speak with you.
And to all of our listeners, thank you too. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please be sure to hit the like button, be sure to subscribe, hit the bell notification if you're watching on Facebook or on YouTube rather. Also, the best way to help us is to help get this information out there. Share it with friends or colleagues or other people that you think will be interested in this work, because that helps us. And if you want to support me personally for doing this, The best way to do that is to sign up for my Spagyric of the Month Club. You can do that at phoenixaurelius.org. There's links all over in the apothecary site. For a $75 flat fee within the United States, you can pay $75 and get 5 new Spagyrics shipped to your front door every single month. It's a really great value. You save tons of money over the retail costs of these, and it gives us consistent monetary support to continue providing things like this and offering more research and information to you, because at the end of the day, it's really expensive, takes a lot of special equipment, and very difficult to actually perform this research. Takes a lot of time. So we appreciate your support. All right. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a good one.